A dangerous man who was hiding from the police walked up to a royal guard. Tourists were watching, but they didn't know he was dangerous. Suddenly, he reached into his coat and took out a gun. In that tiny bit of time, everything changed. What happened after that shocked everyone. But before we go on, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And subscribe to our channel if you respect the royal guards. The afternoon shadows were getting long in the courtyard of Buckingham Palace. Guard Peter Thompson was doing his job, standing very still. His red uniform shone in the setting sun. His brass buttons and medals showed his years of service. He'd been in the army for 20 years, including 3 dangerous war zones. This had made him very alert, and now he felt something was wrong. Among the tourists, one man stood out to Peter. The man looked casual, but he moved in a careful way. He looked too closely at things. While others looked at the palace, this man studied the layout and how the guards patrolled. He looked like he'd done this before. The man's expensive coat didn't match his old boots, the kind some army groups used. Peter had seen those boots before. His clean face and neat hair looked like he was trying too hard to fit in. But Peter had seen that same look in much more dangerous places. The man started to walk closer to Peter. His path seemed random, but it was a classic way to sneak up on someone. Other tourists moved away from him, feeling something was wrong. A mum pulled her children closer. She looked worried. "Quite something, isn't it?" the man finally said. His accent was plain, but there was a hard, cold tone underneath. All this show, he pointed at the palace, all this pretending to be powerful. He spoke loud enough for nearby tourists to hear. They started to look uncomfortable. Peter kept looking straight ahead. Years of training kept him still, even though he felt tense. The man gave off a familiar kind of danger, not like a normal criminal, but like someone with a strong, bad belief. "You stand here," the man went on, moving to Peter's left, guarding the signs of a kingdom built on lies. His voice got lower, just for Peter to hear. "But we know the truth, don't we? About how your people think they're better." The words were full of hate, like from a speech written in a dark room. An old man, wearing a veteran's badge, stopped walking. His face showed he knew what was happening. He looked at Peter for a second, one soldier to another. Then he moved near a young family, ready to help if needed. "Your silence is what I expected," the man said. His tone was getting more annoyed. "Like all of you, hiding behind rules while the world changes." He moved right in front of Peter, close enough for Peter to smell gun oil under his expensive aftershave. The light shone on Peter's medals, each one earned in wars where he'd fought against ideas like this. The man's eyes went to the medals. He knew what they meant, what kind of soldier Peter was. "But today," the man's voice got excited, "we'll see what's underneath all this show. What happens when symbols meet real life?" His right hand moved to his coat pocket. Peter's senses, sharpened by war, saw it clearly. The courtyard had gone quiet. The tourists had stopped chatting, sensing the danger. The veteran had quietly moved the young family towards the palace gates, trying not to draw attention. Peter stayed still, but every nerve and muscle was ready. He'd lived through city wars and mountain fights. As the man started to circle him again, Peter thought about weapons, the bulge of a gun, maybe a backup weapon, and something extra in his jacket. "You know what I see when I look at this palace?" The man's voice was full of hate. "I see a dying culture, a culture that's gone soft and weak, happy to play dress-up while real power moves somewhere else." His words were full of poison, each one showing years of built-up hate. The remaining tourists could feel something was wrong. Their happy chatter turned to worried whispers. Cameras went down as they realized they were seeing something more than just a tourist show. A group of schoolchildren were quietly moved away by their teacher, who looked worried. "All these medals," the man sneered. moving close enough for his breath to mist the brass on Peter's uniform. Earned fighting for what? Democracy? Freedom? He spat the words out like they were bad. Nice words to hide the rot. But we see the truth. We see how your mixed-race paradise is falling apart. How your kindness has become a weapon against you. The old veteran had moved near a palace emergency phone. He looked alert. He'd seen this kind of person before, in old newsreels and in the words of modern extremists. The hate might have a new look, but it was the same. Your silence is funny, the man went on, circling Peter again. Standing here guarding nothing while your world falls apart around you. Did you know? His voice went low, like he was sharing a secret. That we're getting stronger every day in every city, every country you thought you'd freed. Our message is spreading. Your win in Tarish 45 was only temporary. Things are changing. Peter's eyes stayed forward, but his senses followed every move the man made. The way he stood showed army training, not British or American, but maybe Eastern European. He looked like he had real experience, not just ideas. Maybe it's time for a history lesson. The man's voice got louder, now talking to the remaining onlookers. About how kingdoms fall, about how your kindness, your democracy, your different races. He almost growled the words. They're all just weakness pretending to be strong. Today, here, we'll show that truth. A young couple walked past quickly. The woman looked pale, knowing the hate in his words. Her partner put himself between her and the scene, hurrying her towards the gates. The man watched them with cold eyes, full of hate. Look at them running away, he said. Your people so easily scared, so soft. When the time comes, and it is coming, they'll give up easily. But you, he turned back to Peter. You stand here, stuck with rules and tradition, while I say these things. Does it hurt? Does it make you feel anything in that clean, controlled, politically correct mind of yours? Still nothing? The man's controlled look started to break. He sounded annoyed. Then maybe it's time for something more. Something to show your tourists, your mixed-race audience, what real belief looks like. His hand moved to his coat, his movements now showing his purpose. The old veteran's eyes widened. He'd seen that movement before, years ago, in wars. His hand moved to the emergency phone, but he knew help would arrive too late. Sunlight shone on the gun, its dark surface like a black hole, ready to swallow everything. The metal seemed alive in his hands, its used surface telling stories of other times like this, other targets, other results. Actions are what change the world. He went on, his eyes shining like the steel in his hands. Actions are what people remember, long after the screaming stops. Actions are what write history in blood and metal, long after all your words about duty and honor have faded away. The few remaining tourists froze in horror, their holiday photos forgotten. A woman held back a scream, her nails digging into her partner's arm. A child, too young to understand but old enough to feel it, hid his face in his mum's skirt. Beautiful, isn't it? The man held the gun like he loved it, its end pointing at the ground, for now, like a snake waiting to strike. Every movement showed lots of training, but not army training. Something else, something darker. CZ-75, changed for special reasons. 15 bullets of purpose, of belief, of change. His thumb touched the safety catch, then took it off with practiced skill. The soft click sounded loud in the silence. No cameras here, no phones recording. Your tradition. How quickly they run when real life comes into their tourist dream. Peter's eyes stayed forward, but his senses took in every detail. The wear on the barrel showed it had been used a lot, not just for practice, but in real life. The grip showed changes made by a certain gun shop, known to work for some extremist groups. The way the man held it told Peter a lot. This wasn't a normal criminal. but someone who had pointed guns at people before. "I could end it here." The man's voice sounded dreamy, like a poet thinking about a beautiful line. "One shot to break your show, to show everyone how weak your system is." He raised the gun slowly, enjoying each movement, like a music conductor making a big sound. Every movement was meant to make people feel more scared. "But first, I want you to do something. I want you to say it's all meaningless. The uniform, the tradition, the rules. Just empty signs, protecting a dying world. Signs that bleed and die, just like everything else." The gun stopped, aimed at Peter's chest, where his medals shone in the sun. The man's finger was careful, resting alongside the trigger, not on it, showing advanced training. His stance showed Eastern European army teaching, but changed with more recent terrorist ideas. Everything about how he held the gun showed Peter he was right. This was a trained fighter, with a mission and the skills to do it. The sun shone on the gun's barrel, making silver reflections on the old stones, like dancing ghosts. Time seemed to stop, each second stretching out as the man's finger started to move towards the trigger. In that frozen moment, Peter's senses, sharpened by war, saw everything clearly. The exact angle of the gun, the man's weight, showing his next move, the tiny signs that gave away his plans. Years of training worked out angles and options quickly, like a computer. "Nothing? Not even now?" The man's voice got hard, with a sound of winning already in it. His finger tightened, muscles getting ready for the final squeeze. "Then let this be a lesson to everyone who still believes in the old world. Let them see how their traditions fall before real." His words stopped. He took a sharp breath as Peter moved. Not the slow movements tourists came to see, but the quick skill of a soldier who had spent years getting it right. The change from show guard to fighter happened in less than a second, showing years of learning the balance between show and deadly force. Before the man's finger could reach the trigger, before his brain could even understand what was happening, Peter's hand shot out, fast as a snake. In one smooth movement, Peter's white-gloved hand grabbed the gun. His grip, made strong by thousands of hours of training, found the exact points needed. The movement came from skills learned in close fighting with special forces, made perfect in anti-terrorist work that would never be in history books. The gun seemed to disappear from the man's grasp, moved to Peter's control so smoothly that some people watching later said they hadn't even seen it, just a blur of white glove and then empty hands. Peter's fingers moved with practiced skill, each movement careful. The magazine release button was pressed with exactly the right pressure, not like someone learning, but like someone who had done this while being shot at. The magazine dropped out, caught in his left hand before it could hit the ground. The weight told him it was full. The brass tops of the bullets shone in the sun, each one a possible tragedy stopped. His thumb found the slide release with perfect skill, the movement flowing like water. The bullet in the chamber flew out in a curve, spinning through the air before hitting the stones with a sound like a small bell. His hands carried on their dance of taking the gun apart, each movement showing hours spent learning these skills. Check. Chamber clear. Safety on. Mechanism secured. The whole thing took less time than most people need to hear a sudden noise. The man stood frozen, his empty hand still shaped around a gun that wasn't there, fingers grabbing at air, like an audience after a magic trick. His face changed from looking smug to shocked, then to something like fear, as he realized what had happened. Peter finished taking the gun apart in under 3 seconds, a speed that showed similar actions done in much more dangerous places, where failure meant death. CZ-75B made before 2010. Peter spoke for the first time, his voice calm and sure. His eyes went over the gun with professional skill, seeing details only years of training could see. Changed trigger. Special grip panels from a maker in Montenegro. Extended slide release. Titanium guide rod changes liked by a group from the Balkans. The serial number's been changed, but the wear on the barrel shows about 2,000 bullets fired, mostly quiet ones, judging by the dirt. His gloved fingers touched certain points on the gun as he went on, each observation showing years of learning and fighting. The bullets are Czech-made, quiet ones, liked by some groups because they work well with silencers. The magazine spring has been changed recently. Serbian maker, I think. Not normal issue. The firing pin has marks from a certain gunsmith known to work for some extremist groups. His voice stayed calm, like he was talking about the weather, not taking apart a would-be killer's gun. "Give it back!" the man growled, his careful act gone completely. He held out his hand, demanding now. Peter's answer was quick and firm. Using the gun's grip as a turning point, he brought the weapon's backsight down in a precise curve. The hard steel hit the bridge of the man's nose with perfect accuracy. Bone cracked with a sound like stepping on dry leaves. Blood came out of the man's nose, staining his expensive coat. He stepped back, hands on his face, all his pretending gone. You broke my nose!" His voice was thick with pain and anger. "No," Peter corrected calmly. "I used the right force to stop a threat to the crown. The broken nose is just a side effect." He stayed calm, still in control. Though I should say, trying to kill a royal guard while carrying a changed weapon with illegal bullets usually has painful results. The man's eyes looked around wildly, looking for a way out. Blood dripped between his fingers, each drop marking the ground like a countdown. "You'll be sorry," he spat, blood spraying with his words. "We have people everywhere. This isn't over." Peter's answer showed he'd heard similar threats before. "Actually, it was over the moment you showed your weapon. You see, while you were talking about the end of the world, you didn't notice some things." His eyes flicked briefly to the old veteran. "The silent alarm was set off 90 seconds ago. Police are already blocking all exits, and your face has been clearly seen by at least 6 security cameras." The man's face went pale under the blood still flowing from his nose. The sound of police sirens started to cut through the air, getting closer. His carefully made plans were falling apart, faster than the blood could drip from his chin. With a look of hate, he turned and ran, pushing past shocked people. His expensive shoes slipped on the stones as he ran, leaving a trail of blood that would make it easy for the police to follow him. Peter stayed at his post, his position going back to normal, even as police cars stopped at the palace gates. Armed police got out, their movements showing the drills done for this kind of situation. The old veteran went up to the officers, his army background showing as he gave a clear report. Other witnesses came forward, their shocked stories making a clear picture of what had happened. Each one said how fast and controlled the guard had been, how he had stopped the threat without leaving his post or losing his calm. "Detective Inspector," Peter said to the senior officer who came up, his voice staying professional. "The suspect has a changed CZ-75B pistol, got illegally. Based on his accent and how he moved, I'd suggest checking his links to some extremist groups in Eastern Europe." The detective's eyebrows went up slightly as he took notes. "You got all that from a short fight?" "The weapons changes are like those made by a weapons maker in Montenegro. The suspect's stance and how he held the weapon suggest training from a certain army camp." Peter's careful explanation went on. "His ideas and words match known propaganda from some extremist groups we're watching. I think you'll find he's already in your records." As if to prove him right, another officer ran up. As if on cue, another officer rushed up with a tablet. "Sir, facial recognition just got a hit. He's wanted in connection with several incidents across Europe. Interpol's had a flag on him for months." The detective nodded grimly. "Right. We'll have his photo on every news outlet within the hour. He won't get far, not with that broken nose marking him." He glanced at the blood trail leading away from the scene. Though, I have to say, that was quite a precise application of force. The rear sight of a CZ-75B is particularly effective when proper pressure is applied. Peter replied matter-of-factly. The suspect's nose will require medical attention within the next few hours, making it virtually impossible for him to leave the city undetected. The elderly veteran, who had finished giving his statement, approached Peter with a crisp salute. "Royal Marines, retired," he introduced himself. "That was textbook threat neutralization, son. Reminded me of our close protection training in '82. Peter returned the salute with perfect form. "Thank you, sir. Though I suspect your generation had to handle worse situations than a single-armed ideologue." "Perhaps." The veteran smiled slightly. "But we didn't have to do it while maintaining ceremonial guard protocol." He glanced at Peter's still perfect uniform and posture. "I'd say the standards have gone up since my day." As the police began cordoning off the area and taking statements from witnesses, life around Buckingham Palace began returning to normal. Tourists, now held at a safe distance, watched as forensics teams photographed the blood trail and recovered the ejected bullet from the courtyard stones. The detective made a few final notes before turning back to Peter. "We'll need a full statement later, but for now, is there anything else you can tell us about the suspect?" "Just one thing," Peter replied, his eyes scanning the perimeter with professional thoroughness. "Given his ideology and training, he'll likely seek medical attention from underground sources. I'd suggest monitoring certain clinics in the East End, particularly those with recent connections to Balkan expatriate communities." The detective's radio crackled with updates as surveillance cameras tracked the suspect's flight through London's streets. Every police officer in the city now had his description, every hospital was on alert, and a network of law enforcement agencies was closing in like a net around their wounded quarry. The ceremonial uniform might draw tourists' attention, but beneath it stood a warrior who had proven once again that the Guard's traditions were built on very real foundations of skill, courage, and unwavering dedication to duty. The elderly veteran, before departing, cast one final glance at Peter's post. In that perfect posture, that unshakable dedication, he saw the living embodiment of what their service had always been about. Not just standing guard, but standing ready, prepared to meet any threat with disciplined, precise response. What would you have done in Guard Peter's position? How many of us could maintain such perfect composure in the face of direct threats, only to act with precise, controlled force when the moment demanded it? These are the men and women who stand guard over our traditions and values, not as mere symbols, but as highly trained professionals, ready to defend what they hold dear. Their ceremonial duties might draw tourists' cameras, but their real strength lies in what you don't see. Until moments like these reveal it. Have you ever witnessed a moment where someone's true training and character were revealed in a crisis? What do you think about the balance between ceremonial duty and combat readiness that Royal Guards must maintain? Share your thoughts in the comments below.